So localization is actually a very important topic, especially for India, because we have so many languages. And and we were chatting just before this panel. There are about almost all of the people who are coming on to starting using the internet. Their interface is the mobile web, and increasingly they want content in their local language. And it's not just the web, like which is what is the most visible, but the same goes for domain names. Like you can register .bharat in Devanagari today, whether it is email related issues. So the idea of this panel was to sensitize everybody, the developers in this room, to what are the challenges when implementing language support, especially Indian language support. In protocols. To that, over to you, Ramki.
Okay. Most of us here come from different cultural and language backgrounds in India, and most of us are comfortable with 2 or 3 languages, both spoken, written. Maybe two would be a good marker, and 2 Indian languages. So when Vinayak asked me to moderate a topic on IETF and when Vinayak asked me to moderate a discussion in an IETF forum about Indian languages and localization, I was a bit surprised. I thought, isn't IETF working on a layer below that, and not it's usually in the boundaries of the W3C to address the issues of Indian languages. But if you take a look at the bigger perspective, most of the internet has been a relatively new adoption to the masses of India. A few of us in colleges had the privilege of using it and grow with it, and also see languages and languages as in programming languages grow around the internet, the ones which are popular right now. The other side of the thing is Indian languages on the internet. The story has not been that smooth over a period of years. I mean, too many research groups working in silos. Too many. I would say published software was very less, and there was a lot of research being done in most of these languages. So this is one of the contexts in which Indic is. Indic was, and right now with the advent of internet. Languages reaching people even in rural places through, like, WhatsApp has been very popular among the internet users in India. And my dad tried to talk to me about Bitcoin investments last week, who has never used computers in his life. So I thought, wow, okay, my dad's talking about cryptocurrency now. So I figured out that yes, it has been people talking about latest internet inventions on WhatsApp to you is like a milestone for me. So this is one of the contexts, but we'll get into bits of it. I would ask Vivek to talk about his experience with Indic, because he is one of the earlier Indic pioneers in India, writing actual software from early 90s till now. So, Vivek, what has your experience been developing Indian languages and the problems and obstacles you have overcome?
Hello? Audible? Okay. So, yeah, developing for India, it's been my passion, and I've been doing it for like more than 20 years now, maybe 22 years or 23 years now. But what we see now is actually a lot more exciting than what we saw until this time. And so what is happening? So we, I mean, at Reverie, we started in late 2009, December 2009 or January 2010. At that time, we were a startup, and when we wanted to work on Indian languages, we did not get any funding. That's because nobody believed that India has got a non-English market. People all over the world, and including people inside the country, they believed that India has an English market. You can target India with English only, because anybody who doesn't know English doesn't have the power to pay. And for a really long time, we kept on struggling, and so we bootstrapped. We became profitable, etc., etc. But that's a separate thing. Before we could realize, while we were still talking that India is eventually will become, an Indian language market, will grow, and therefore will become a non-English dominant market. While we were still talking about it, it happened. Today, the reports say that 9 out of 10 new internet users who use internet are from their mobile phones and do not know English. The use of Indian languages put together on the internet is already more than that of English out of India, right? So the use of Hindi itself will surpass the use of English probably by 2018 end. So that is the rate at which it is all growing. But at the same time, there is a wonderful contrast to it. So Google says that when it crawls all the internet, it finds that 56% of all the content is in English. And all the Indian languages put together, it is 0.1%. Everybody here understands Hindi? Everyone, right? Anyone who doesn't? Oh, no, not you. Not counted. So my question is that if we already have more Indian language users than English, what is it that they are consuming? Where is the content? Content, all Indian languages put together is 0.1%. But they are still trying. That is the eagerness. By the sheer number of users itself, the usage has increased. People are trying pretty desperately to use. They are unable to, right? So I won't really go back to history now, but there is a very good history, if I may just take 2 minutes to make you guys understand that when computers were first created in the 1950s, the need to create, language support for computers was felt by 1960s. Tab ASCII bana. ASCII as a standard was evolved, which was good enough for English and was capable of getting encoded in just 7 bits. So therefore, character as an encoding with only 1 byte remained for a really long time. That was in 1960s. Within 10 years' time, a young scientist who just was working on his PhD in IIT Kanpur, he thought that Indic computing would become a need and started working in designing Indic computing and evolved his own Indic code standard like ASCII, called that ISCII, which eventually became the first Indian script code standard released by Bureau of Indian Standards in the 1980s. So it was that early that all the work began with such vision. And all of that suddenly got lost in the year 2000. So Ramke would also be able to share the same vision, same journey. But so that is where it actually slowed down the use of Indian languages in computing medium and also the amount of content that was getting created. This is again the era where it has actually re-erupted.
Carsten, what has your experience been with non-Latin languages on the internet?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I should say that I'm a German, so I'm already have this internationalization problem that everybody else in this room has. But our language is only slightly different in its writing system from what is used in the English-speaking countries. So we always have had these umlauts, which were just strange things, and we even have a way to write things just using ASCII characters, and that's still the way I type, because I started computers 40 years ago. At some point, we had a solution for the problem using single byte character sets in Europe, which was called ISO 8859-1 or Latin 1. But then, of course, it became very clear we had to support other writing systems as well. And then there were all these other 8859s for Greek and Russian and so on. At some point we noticed we can't really have this really big zoo of different coding systems. There's even a standard for switching between standards, which is called ISO 2022. Unicode was created, and it took a long time from the first version of ISO 10646 to it becoming the dominating way to do things on the web and with computers. But the problem, of course, is just having character codes is not enough. There's also a whole area of localization with date formats and how does a name even look like in a specific environment. So in Europe, for instance, the Spanish have different names than everybody else, which always confuses systems. And so that's a whole area. And in Internet protocols, we have a few places where, even though these are the inner workings of the Internet, we are dealing with user-visible names. And the domain naming system is an example for that. And one very important project was to make the domain name system be able to take Unicode names. And that's pretty much completed. So I now can have a müller.de site in Germany, and you can have one for most of your languages as well. And the other problem that we had is that the Unicode standardization has involved experts from various areas, but the people who actually understand a language and understand the intricacies of its writing system are not necessarily exactly the same people who understand Unicode and the way how you would encode things in Unicode. So one big project that was used to start the Unicode work was the Cjk Harmonization, where they tried to find out which of the characters of the Chinese system, of the Japanese system, and the Korean system actually were the same characters, given that they were all invented by the Chinese. It was, at first sight, kind of obvious, let's harmonize all that. But then when you go into the details, it becomes more complicated. And, of course, every country and every region already had their way of representing Chinese characters. There are even two different ways of representing Chinese characters, simplified and traditional Japanese characters and Korean characters. And the harmonization didn't quite work out. So one interesting thing happened, which is, of course, people stuck to their national standards because much of the content, much of the market was nationally oriented. I mean, a Chinese person in the 90s didn't really talk to a Japanese person very much. Still don't. But the countries went forward to adopting Unicode in different speeds. And in China, for instance, they have a special representation variant for Chinese, which is compatible to their old representation, but embraces Unicode. But the last barrier was the Japanese environment, where they have different representation variants for some characters. And so they were very slow to pick up those harmonized characters because they were sometimes shown as Chinese characters when they should have been shown as Japanese characters. And it took them a long time to give up their existing system and switch to Unicode. I think one important thing to learn from that is the fact that it took them such a long time to do that also slowed down the rate at which bugs in the Unicode environment were fixed. And I think it's much better to actually embrace new standards wholeheartedly and make sure that the bugs in there actually are fixed. I mean, the Unicode standard is evolving. It's version 10 right now, if I haven't missed one. So things are being fixed, and I think it's really important for the various languages you have here and the various writing systems you have here to get the information flowing, to get the people who really know the details of that writing system, talk to people who know about the intricacies of the Unicode system, and make sure the representation is done right and bugs are fixed. So it's not just a way of having a legacy encoding somewhere and just translating this to Unicode, but because that may not work well. And it's not just the rendering, the data are there to be processed. So you want to be able to search data and do other processing with them. So you really have to have the domain experts, the language experts talk to the computer experts to get this right.
Does IETF provide any tools for folks? Say somebody has email in an Indian language domain. Now that you have domain names in Indian languages available like .bharat, so somebody has their, say, like I have like Ramakrishna at something .bharat. So are there any tools which looks for correctness or which looks for authenticity of these email names, like IAN names or something?
Well, I'm not an expert for this domain name work, but yes, of course, there are tools. So not every Unicode string can be used as a domain name for a reason, because it's easy to do fraud by substituting characters with equally looking characters from a different script. So you have to make sure that things actually fit together, so that there is no abuse being done by that. So, but there are tools out there that can be used to check that a name fulfills the requirements. Most registries right now for domain names are able to support Indian names. I don't know how it works in India, whether you have those. Do you have top-level domains for?
Yes, there's a .bharat domain.
But that's for how many of your writing systems or languages?
There are about 14 writing systems, so it's much more complex than most of the languages.
So definitely it's there in Devanagari, which is like the script used by at least seven official languages. Yeah.
And that was a representation of about 450 million of the people who use Devanagari.
So that's one other interesting observation we have made. When a script is actually used by a number of different languages, there may be some minor details that only surface when you actually start using these other languages as well. So, for instance, the Arabic script is used for Arabic, of course, which everybody who knows the Arabic script knows about. But then it's also used for Persian and some obscure Mongolian languages and so on. They all have interesting things in their writing system.
Vivek, coming back to you, what are the technical issues right now people are facing, given mobile computing has penetrated to most of the places and most of the people, although if they don't even have a toilet at home, they do have a smartphone in India?
Okay, so yeah, smartphone penetration in India is almost 50%. Half of the phones owned by Indians are smartphones. We are the second largest smartphone market in the world. So we are definitely not being ignored. We are actually becoming the most attractive market for everyone because of that. But the problem was, for a long time, people were more interested to just sell the phone than reach the user. So what used to happen is that nobody was as keen to actually implement Indian language support on the devices that are being sold. People are interested to buy a smartphone because it is fancy, they can watch videos, and that was the predominant usage. And as long as it was getting sold, nobody really bothered. But the key problem that was that not having support for local languages would mean that you cannot really reach out to a user in his language and therefore not be able to communicate a lot of things. This was practically sensitized by probably the current government. About 2.5 years ago, the government woke up to the fact that when they were trying to reach out to citizens by sending messages or whatever, about 70% of the people did not receive anything, because their devices could not show them their languages. So they said that let the industry therefore get a mandate to support all the 22 official languages for any device being sold inside India, right? So that is likely to happen now from February.
But are the solutions readily available in terms of input and spell checking and in the mobile space, fonts?
Yeah. So actually, this is a very, very good question, very pertinent question, because when the government thought that they are unable to reach out, they obviously did not have a visibility into what all would be needed to actually grow the usage. And what you are saying is right, that if you don't have a good way to input or spell check and do all the things that you are able to do for English, then you would probably not be at par with English. You will still stay a little crippled. And that has been a fact. Not everything is there. We don't have an input standard. That 2 different English keyboards will still have the QWERTY layout, but 2 different Indian language keyboards from different vendors would probably not be looking the same. And also at the same time, because of these difficulties, I have always been telling, in fact, I tell at every forum, that when people say, Indian language mein type karna mushkil hai, as compared to English, right? What I said is that typing in Indian language is more difficult than in English. I say that you did not compare apples to apples. Yes, I can understand, but likhna bhi mushkil hai. Even writing is more difficult in that case. Why? That's because when you are learning English, you are taught A, B, C, D up to Z, 26 letters, and that's it. Now, if you were to write your name or maybe write apple, all that you need is a spelling. It has got 5 letters. Somebody tells you the 5 letters you are able to write. And that's exactly how it translates to even typing. You just have to type those letters. There are only 26. But when you are learning to write an Indian language, that is your mother tongue, it is a 3-step process. You first learn the Varnamala, which is the alphabet. Then you learn Bharakhadi, which is the vowel combinations. Then you learn Yuktakshas, which is the conjuncts or the consonant combinations. And only then you are able to start writing your language. Now, how do these 3 steps translate into the digital medium? That you won't dream about. If you are not taught, you don't know. So it becomes a natural difficulty, and therefore we keep on, brushing that aside by saying that it's difficult. It's not difficult. You just don't know it. And we can't know it because it doesn't translate exactly the same way. So therefore, I have been persuading that we should be teaching that in schools. These days in schools, we already have, computers getting introduced even at nursery levels or maybe primary schools. And there, what is taught? Microsoft Paint and then Microsoft Word. Let us say Microsoft Word is being taught, but the assignment is in English. Why can't there be a local language assignment, 1 assignment a week? Just do it on your computer and that's it. You just need to learn the fundamentals and thereafter it's your choice, right?
So another thing which brings me an interesting question about lots of Indian languages being used on the mobile than English, and it's going to outrun. It's not necessary that most of these people are literate. They might be using. So how much do you see speech playing an important role now that you have virtual assistants like the Google Assist or the Alexa coming into the Indian context?
Yeah, another good question. So speech is actually important whether you are literate or not. In any case, the very fact that Indian language typing is a little more difficult, or you don't know how to type, maybe speech itself would be good. But at the same time, speech is an intrusive medium. So that is not a true substitute to silent typing. So typing is obviously important, but when you are busy or you are in a car or you don't know how to type, you should be able to speak to a system that speaks back to you. That is definitely a key technology. And that is the only medium that practically reaches to everyone, irrespective of literacy or illiteracy, unless you don't know how to speak or hear.
So, building upon what Vivek said, I mean, most of us as developers or policymakers at different levels, there are different ways to contribute actually. Most of the programming languages now support Unicode. You can see how your language is actually behaving on a particular programming language. Or like, for example, you have lowercase strings, to get it uppercase. Does it really hold good in Indian context? Okay, like concatenating strings, or is it a proper, is it a valid word? Like you put two consonants together, is it a valid character? So all of this data is kind of, it's done in bits and pieces, but it's not fully done. It's not fully tested. So if you're a coder or if you're using Indian languages, I mean, if you have spare time and you want to contribute to Indian languages, these are a few places where you can look into. For example, there are rendering engines in browsers itself. You could actually send a report back saying that, yeah, this character is not being rendered well. And there are pretty good engineers at Mozilla and Google who take look into these issues and also start sending patches back to the upstream open source projects which they are consuming. So these are a few of the key pointers which you might want to look into. Because when I remember back in early 2000s, and we went out to build a operating system for Indian languages, and the motivation was few European countries have like 10 million population, 8 million, 10 million. In India, like if you take a look at the top 10 languages, you have at least 50 million or more speakers. And 2 or 3 European countries put together don't have so many users, and they still do their work in their own native language, as in Hungarian or whatever. So that was the thing. And the higher philosophical motivation was most of computing, what we see is binary, zeros and ones, and zero being invented in India. We never had an operating system in Indian languages. So yeah, we decided, yes, we need to get an Indian language operating system. Now, what do? You need a font, you need a keyboard input method. Now, as programmers, if you don't find anything, you decide to create it yourself, and you'll run into a lot of friction with people saying that, hey, this is not the right way. Okay, then you start learning, okay, there are phonetic ways, and then we discover that there is a standard called InScript mandated by Indian government for input. So then the first phase was to get these, get an input method working in your operating system. Then we said, okay, it's typing, but it's not typing correctly. So what's the second level of issue? Oh, the rendering engine needs to be fixed. So let's send fixes to the libc, which is the basic C library for Linux or Unix, which can handle locale data. That time you'll start understanding that every decision you take is a cost in programming, saying that if I take this decision about this is the way 2 consonants need to join together, the benefit you might get is good, but the cost which you're taking is there might be words in your native language which can never be represented on the computer. So as developers, you also have that responsibility so that you don't run into the wrong books of the classical language fundamentalists, as I call them. The third thing is with mobile, the language also, look at our English communication right now. Okay, so back in the day when you followed the RFCs, you wrote an email in a proper way, and you responded to the email inline, not top posting and all. But now the way the language evolves, even the Indian languages are going to evolve. They're going to create new words. Words are going to be adopted from English or other foreign languages also. So even languages would evolve along with the internet right now, and companies, people, industry, and universities have an important role to play, that you don't kill your language. As in, there are many dialects of India which are dying over and over again. Probably the language which we are speaking right now in our houses were not the original languages which our grandparents spoke, because those languages died out maybe, and we have adopted a popular mainstream language at home also. So these are my few bits. The other thing with internet is now everything IETF or ISEC is, do you guys participate in the decisions or policies? Like for example, everything is tied to Aadhaar. right now, and everybody is using their mobile to access their direct benefits. So, like for example, the RFC 7258, the pervasive monitoring of people. Citizens ought to know their rights. Okay, so have you guys participated in any of the standardizing bodies in India, or like, because one of your goals is to be a nodal agency for,
So unfortunately, the tragedy, I think, I would say that in some sense, the ITF is made of people who actually participate in, whether it's the physical meeting or through the mailing list. And any kind of standard, any kind of design becomes better when the people who are actually participating actually push for it and talk about it. But the issue has been that almost everybody who has been participating in the ITF, for example, communicates with English. So there, and because as you said, like Vivek was saying, there's it's much harder for people to participate. Because I have been to the ITF many times and I've seen that people from China, Chinese people actually are typing mail in their own languages. But I have never seen any Indian over the years actually type any kind of email or any kind of thing. So the tooling is actually quite bad, and the tooling is bad because the people who participate are actually not raising these issues, and because they are not raising these issues are not addressed, and because these issues are not addressed, we have kind of stuck in this spiral where these issues are never fixed. And the government and other people have been constantly complaining that either the standard body or all of the people who actually make the standards, whether it's the ITF or otherwise, have either a US-centric or a Euro-centric view of the world. But the fact is that the ITF is very open-ended that way, and if there has been participation, for example, in the DNS-related world, for example, that's why we have a .Bharat, and I see no reason why we cannot localize the rest of the web to us, right? For example, even like I'm more familiar with the application world, right? So for HTTP, there is a content language, right? Time zone data. So there are a lot of this data that can be interchanged in local language, just that the tooling around it is missing. And so it's kind of hit this like negative virtuous cycle where because something does not exist, nobody fixes it, and it has become like a network effect. And the problem with that is the more and more people are getting disconnected. And just like protocols allow computers to communicate, language allows humans to communicate, right? And because every time, just as we are seeing like a lot of, because like I just mentioned that in my own talk, like everything is getting kind of loaded onto HTTP, for example, because port 80 is open. It's the easiest path around, and the same thing is probably happening with English and the web. It's the easiest way to reach. And until this like cycle is broken and people participate, I don't see some of this tooling around emails, around DNS getting fixed. So yeah, so it's a difficult problem to solve.
So one thing that's happening right now is that translation technologies are actually getting better. And so more than once I have just run some message that came from one of my students and was in German through Google Translate, fixed it up a little bit and just sent it onto a mailing list. So I could use the useful information that student had. And I would really like to encourage you to do that. I mean, if it's difficult for you to communicate in English, use those translation services. And I'm pretty sure that the people on the English side of the equation are really happy to get this information and are willing to take a little bit of inconvenience being caused by those translation services. That's okay as long as we get the communication going. So maybe try sending your next message to the mailing list through Google Translate to get some communication going that would have been impossible otherwise.
Actually, there is another data point that makes all of us in this room, at least feel very responsible for this. And I was speaking with the same tone 2 months ago in a standardization committee, which is that what do we think is the number of Indian language text users? Let us say if 100 is the total amount of text being consumed inside India, what percentage of that should be in English and what percentage would be in non-English? Anybody here? Okay, so less than 8% is English. More than 92% is in non-English. And this 8% is also because the newspapers that are being kept in the offices are insisted to be in English, and therefore a lot of English newspaper sells just because they are supposed to be there, right? Whereas the Indian language reader is more voluntary, just goes, buys and reads. No offices keep local language newspapers as much. With that fact, if there is so much readership that is offline, it is non-digital, right? All these Indian language content is not available digitally. ये सारे publishers कर क्या रहे हैं? Are they not really keen to reach out to their readers? The readers in the digital medium? Wouldn't they want to become their, discoverable? They do. But what is the problem? Why is it that they are not adopting? Why are they not doing it, or are they unable to do it? These are certain questions. We are sitting in this room. We have the ability to probably try and influence some of it, but we are not the local language users. So it doesn't hurt us if we are in a position where we are to define standards or pursue standards, and we don't feel the pain. And it is very unlikely that we will actually crack that particular problem. This problem will remain. It's not that there is no need. There is. So अभी वो जो स्टैंडर्डाइजेशन कमेटी में भी मैं था, वहां पे उन्होंने इस बात पे झगड़ा किया 2 साल तक कि यार ये जो कुछ अजीबो-गरीब कैरेक्टर्स हैं, जो आर्काइक कैरेक्टर्स हैं, उनको should we include those in the part of encoding or can they be removed? They should be removed was proposal from our side, just because we wanted it to be simple for users, and should be kept was something that they were debating on for 2 years, instead of trying to focus how we can actually make Indian language implementation simpler. Right? Why? Just because in the entire room there was nobody who would have difficulty using the internet if English was gone.
Also, just to add to that, the tragic part is like so many of us use Twitter, and Twitter does support Indian languages, right? I mean, you can see that, especially on both sides of the divide, there's a left versus right divide, right? And if somebody says something about a prime minister or some favorite chief minister of theirs, even the abusing is in the local language. And I think that is the best part, right? You can and when you abuse, I think that is when you kind of, even us among this room, that is when we actually use a local language, because that is where the emotions are explained. That is where the language kind of comes in, right? The other observation I had very interestingly was, even when these technologies exist, a lot of people do not know how to use them. So you will see on WhatsApp and even on open web like Twitter, people actually communicate using screenshots and images which are written in local language just because they don't know how to type. Which means there is a definite need for it, but it's just that as I said again, the tooling does not exist.
That's right. So and the people who need it, they don't have a means to even facilitate the tooling. They are far away from all of that. It's therefore probably our responsibility. It's like we can all fall sick, but we don't know how to set ourselves right. We have to go to the doctor. If the doctors shed out their responsibility to research and keep themselves, right in terms of, how they can give us the right medicines, we would suffer.
I have a fundamental question. How many of us actually teach our kids, and the medium of instruction would be different than the English? Because it starts from there, because kids are taught A, B, C, D. and then they start typing the same thing.
So we don't. But that is not the large part of India, right? So there are so many people who don't know English that they can't teach their kids English either. Right? A lot of education actually happens at home. So it is very unlikely that all these kids will eventually learn English soon enough. There is still going to be, it's going to take a really long time. And no matter what, even after in English education, do we really want to shed away our own languages? There are many of us who actually like to be creative in our own languages. Just not doing it. We might be writing poems and stories and blogging in English, but we are unable to blog in our own language and just because we don't know how to type.
Yeah, we'll take 2 more questions and then we can have offline discussions. Yes, sir.
Hello. Yeah. So I have actually a couple of observations on this. One thing, what Vinayak was pointing at, or people participating in IETF, thinking about it, and all these things. One problem is in India is that English is considered as a mark of intelligence. That is a fundamental problem we have, the educated India. And that is where the boundary between Bharat and India really exists. And I really appreciate your point that there is a common belief that do we really need anything other than English? But the locality where I till date I live, actually not being able to, well, that is another thing. The technical education, that is by and large, unlike other countries, considering Germany, considering Japan, to some extent China, technical education is by and large is in English, and that is actually creating a disconnect. I know many of my close associates who are beautiful minds, innovative minds, but they cannot express because they are not good in English. They cannot get good marks because they are not good in English. Now, while we are talking about Indic languages, I think we need to have a pan South Asian view. Why I am saying this? Not all languages are only used by the Indian states. For example, I am a Bengali. My mother tongue is Bangla. To be very honest, I rely on the innovations coming from Bangladesh. I extensively use Bengali language in the web. For example, they have come up with a phonetic kind of typing system, which I find even better than what Google has offered. And most of the most of our computers in Bengal, they are actually downloading that system. So there is a need to standardize across, and also it will be same for Punjabi because that is spread across the border, India, Pakistan. So I don't know what is happening in Pakistan. The other thing is in Bangladesh, actually they are far ahead, I'll say. Recently they have come up with a interpreter language called Pataka, which in English will translate to flag. What it does is, it allows you to write the keywords of C language. So like for, if, else, all these things, you can actually write in Bangla font, with the, like for you can replace with something in Bangla, and then you can actually run that on a computer. So the primary purpose for that was to educate people of 10th standard on the basics of programming language, how a programming language works, because for them typing all those things in English becomes a bit difficult. And what they are promising is that they will take that as that interpreter to actual running system. Why they are doing this? Because large of the population, they take pride in speaking their own language. even for technical education, and the country was formed out of the right to speak in their own language in 1971. So probably there is, beyond technology, there is some other factors also that we need to look at. Because I say we, because the people who are sitting here are actually talking about the people who are not able to come over here. So we are here to fix the problem for them. So we have to understand, bridge that gap.
Yeah, I completely understand the sentiment, and that's the reason why I was saying that it is our responsibility. Now, I buy what you are trying to say, and that has been written down several times. You said that to some extent China. It's not to some extent China. In fact, China had the option of adopting English for modern education 50 years ago, when they decided that they would rather than introducing English in schools, they would rather engage a lot of scholars to translate modern knowledge and curriculum into Chinese and introduce that into schools. So exactly as that has happened in Europe, Japan, etc., that you told, that happened. So I'll give you a very small statistics, which is also very relevant for all of us here. The school dropout rates across the globe is 50% by primary school and almost 70% by high school. In spite of the fact that China actually mandates, you don't have the freedom. You have to actually, follow. So it mandates studies. If you are studying for 4 years in school in your language, that is your mother tongue, then for the rest of your life, you are able to read, write, and communicate in that language. So you are able to read newspaper, books, storybooks, magazines, and also technical journals, if they are available. So what you are saying is right. Let us say what happened in China is that there also the dropout rates are the same. But because knowledge, and including technical knowledge, yes, because school curriculums, the high school, and including technical education, everything is in Chinese. So those books and additional books and magazines are all available in Chinese. They share technical knowledge, and therefore grassroots level innovations happen even in the streets. हम लोगों को लगता है इंडिया के अंदर में, because higher education is available only in English, the rest, even if they may be genius, have got no ability, no way that they can even get their hands on to anything technical. Economy in the native languages is snatched away, and that's the reason why it suffers. Your point is very, very valid, and a lot of people are trying to fight for it right now. Probably it will happen, but a lot of that actually lies on us as a responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Vivek. I think we'll conclude the panel discussion on localization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Carsten.
Sorry for a little bit of delay, but since the discussion was so well, we did not wanted it to stop.